Hi everyone, welcome to Javaras. Let's continue building our authorization server. In the previous video, we have set up the authorization server and we completed the part of creating realm, creating clients and generating client secret. Now from this video, we will focus on authorization part of it. Now authorization means presenting user with an authorization interface where we can provide the user with all the possible information like realm name, who is the client, what is the home page of the client, and also about the actions the application can take. So these are called scopes as well. In the previous video, while building auth to client, we have already seen what is the authorization request and how to create it. Now the flow is the client application redirects the user to authorization server or more formally to the authorization URL endpoint. After that, the authorization server validates the request, and if the request is valid, then it presents user with a login screen if the user is not logged in, and once the user logs in, then authorization server presents the authorization interface to the user where user can see all the details about the client realm and all the access which the client application is requesting for, and at that point of time the user can either approve or deny the request. Now these are the request parameters. So here this part is called auth endpoint. So here you can see, since we are supporting multiple realms in our authorization server, so we include the realm ID as well here. Then response type is code. Then we send client ID, redirect URI, scope. So scopes are space separated strings, and then state. So these are all the request parameters for authorization request. Now let's see what the authorization server needs to do in order to validate the auth request. First of all, the authorization server needs to validate whether the realm is correct or not. After that, it needs to validate the client. So the client should be available, should belong to correct realm. Otherwise, we will show the error page. After that, it needs to validate the redirect URI. So the redirect URI should not be null and it should be a valid URL. Also, this should be one of the sign-in redirect URIs which are registered to the client. And if any of these criteria is not satisfied, then we show the error page to the user. Now, at this point, we are sure that the client, realm and redirect URI all are good. Now we need to validate some other parameters. Now for all other validations, if any validation fails, then we redirect the user to sign in redirect URI with error and error description. So this is the URL where user gets redirected. This is redirect URI, then error, which will be the error code, and error description, which will be the description of the error. Now let's see how to verify response type. So response type should be present and it should be one of code or token. If it's not the case, then we specify error code invalid request, and error description we specify invalid response type. Now let's say the client is a confidential client, but the response type is token. That means response type is not code. But if the client is confidential, then the response types should always be code. So in this case, the error code can be unauthorized client and we can provide any error description we want. Now let's see how to validate this scope. So scope should be present in the request, and also all the scopes which are present in the request should be valid scopes. If not, then we can say error code is invalid scope. And yeah, we don't need to validate any other things. So the remaining thing is state. So authorization server does not care about state. If state is there, it will send the state back to the user. If it's not there, then it will do nothing. In this video, we will complete the part where user will be able to see the login screen if all these validations pass. Otherwise, user will either see the error page of the authorization server or user will be redirected back to the client application with some error code and error description. So let's get started. First of all, I will create a controller to handle this authorization request. So I will go here, I will create a new package and I will call it authorization. And under this, I will create another package and I will call it UI. So the controllers related to UI, I will put them here. So let's create a class. So I will create a Java class and I will call it authorization controller. So we have authorization controller here. Let's mark it controller and let's say request mapping. So this will be the request mapping. First we can say realms, then realm ID, then auth. So realms, then this will be path variable, realm ID, and then auth. Now what I want to do is I want to create a logger here first so that we can log anything we want. So private static final logger logger will be logger factory dot get logger. So I will create a get mapping. Now this will take some parameters. First of all, I will create a path variable string realm ID and it will take some query parameters. So let's do that. I can say request param and it will be map of string and instead of parameters, let's call it query. And let's have model here as well because we may need this. Now here I want to create a model and so that means the Java class called Auth Request which will represent Auth Request. So inside authorization I will create a new Java class and let's call it Auth Request. So this should not be inside UI, this should be outside of the UI. Say move to package, this one. So inside authorization I have Auth Request here. Now instead of class let's call it record. So I am creating a record here. Now the record will have few things. First of all, it will have a realm ID. Then we will have client ID. Then we will have redirect URI. Then we will have response type. After that we will have scope. Then we will have state. So we have created auth request. So let's close it now. Now in the authorization control here we want to create the auth request. So let's do that. I will say auth request equal to new auth request. First of all, we need the realm ID. Then client ID will be fetched from the query parameters. So query dot get client ID. And after that we need redirect URI. So query dot get redirect URI and then response type. So query dot get response type, then scope, query dot get scope, then state. So query dot get state. So we have created auth request here. Now let's log it. So logger.info. I will just log the auth request. So Instead of this, I will say auth request. Now after this, we need to validate whether this is correct or not. So for that, let's create auth service here. I will create a new Java class, authorization service, and let's mark it service. Now since this is service, so in the controller I want to inject that. So for that, let's do this private final authorization service, and I will add constructor parameter here. Now here I want to validate it. So let's just say this dot authorization service dot validate auth request, and we will pass the auth request here. Now we need to create this method inside authorization service. I will just say create this here. Here first of all I want to verify the realm. So let's just call method validate realm, and this is the auth request. Now let's create this method. So I will create this method here. First of all I will say if auth request dot realm id dot is blank. Let's say if it is null, first of all null, or if it is empty, or instead of empty I will say if it is blank. In that case we will throw one error. Now I want to create a custom error here. So inside authorization, let's create a new Java class, and I will call it invalid auth request exception. Auth request exception, and this will extends runtime exception. And here let's just create this constructor super message. Okay, so that is it. Now let's go to authorization service here, and here if this is the case, then just let's throw new invalid auth request exception, and we can say invalid realm id, or let's just say invalid realm. Now after that we want to fetch the realm from the now we want to fetch the realm, whether any realm exists or not. So we will do that using realm repository, which we have already created in the previous video. So let's inject that here, private final realm repository, and I will do constructor injection here. So this dot realm repository dot find by id, and id is auth request dot realm id. But if it is not present, then we can say or else throw new invalid invalid auth request exception invalid realm. Now we know that the realm is valid. Now let's validate the client. Validate client auth request. So let's create a method here. Now the same thing we will do here. First of all, if auth request dot client id is null, or auth request dot client id is blank, then we will throw new invalid auth request exception, and we can just say invalid client. But let's say the client is valid, so we'll just do this, or not. What we will do is client is equal to this dot. Now we need client repository here, so let's do that. So we are injecting client repository, this dot client repository equal to client repository, this dot client repository dot find by id, auth request dot client id, or else otherwise we want to throw the exception, or else throw invalid client. Now let's say the client is present but it doesn't belong to the realm. So if client dot get realm id dot equals auth request dot realm id. So if this is not equal, then also it is invalid client. So just throw invalid client here. But here instead of saying invalid client, what I will do is client not present, client id not present or empty. Now after this we want to validate the redirect URI. But in order to do that we need the actual client as well. So let's say validate client will return the client here, and here we can just return client. So here we have a client. Now using this client and auth request we can validate if the redirect URI is correct or not. So let's do that. Validate redirect URI, and we will pass in the client and auth request. Now let's create a method here, client auth request. Now we need to validate the redirect URI. What I will do is first of all I will get the reference to the redirect URI, auth request dot redirect URI. Now we will just check if redirect URI is null or if it is empty. In that case we will throw new invalid auth request exception and we will say redirect URI is empty. But otherwise we will get all the redirect URIs of the client. So let's just do that. String URIs equal to client dot get sign in redirect URIs dot split, and we will split it using comma, because we know that all the sign in redirect URI are stored as a single string only with which are comma separated. So we will split them using comma. Now we have a list of all the redirect URIs which are registered, and now we will check. So I can say for string URI in redirect URI, if URI is equal to the redirect URI, then just return true, or just return. Otherwise, if it does not match with any URI, then we will just say redirect URI is invalid. Now we have validated the redirect URI. So client redirect URI. Now for all other errors, we want to redirect the user to redirect URI with error code and error description. So let's see how to do that. So now if you go to invalid auth request exception here I want to create a few fields. So let's just say first is string redirect URI, then we have string, let's say error code, then string error description. Now let's create one more constructor. For that, public invalid auth request exception. Now instead of this, I will just take all these three parameters. So let's just say string redirect URI, string error code, string error description, and here I can say this dot redirect URI and this dot error code, this dot error description, and before that I will just say this and error description. Now after validating redirect URI, I want to validate the response type. Validate response type, and let's give it auth request, and let's create this method. First of all, let's get the response type from auth request. Response type equal to auth request dot response type. If the response type is null or if it is empty, then we can throw invalid auth request exception. But now we will not just provide one message, we will provide redirect URI. So now we need the redirect URI here. So that we can get from auth request dot redirect URI, and we need error code. So let's just say invalid request and the error description. So you can say response type is required. Now this is up to you what error code and what error description you want to provide. But let's say the response type is present. So in this case, we need to make sure that this is one of code and token. So I can say if response type equals code, so and token. That means if response type is not equal to code and it is not equal to token, in that case need to return, we need to throw that error again. So throw new invalid request exception. Now again I will just copy paste. So this is redirect URI invalid request, and we can say invalid response type. So I will say invalid response type. After that, now the response, now this is correct. Now we want to check one more thing, that if the client is confidential, then the response type should be code. So for that we need the client here. So let's put the client here. Now we can just say client. So I will say if client dot is confidential and the response type is not equals to code. In that case, also we will throw this error. So I will copy and paste it here. And instead of invalid request, let's just say unauthorized client, unauthorized client, and I will just say invalid response type. Now we need to validate the scope. We will read more about a scope in the later videos. So, but what you need to keep in mind is that scopes are generally some strings only. So let's say you have one scope called read. That means client can read something. So now what does each scope strings mean is determined by the authorization server. So in one case, read means reading the emails. In another authorization server, the read may means like reading contacts or reading your files which are stored in some storage server or something. So these are all called scopes. So, and we have used emails, OpenID and profile scope. These are some normal scopes. So email means the client application can read your email. Profile means the client application can see your profile, and so on and so forth. Now, generally, the scopes are the scopes are specific for realms. So in some realm, you can create different scopes. So the developer can specify their own scope in the authorization server for each realm. But what we are going to do in this video is we will hard code some valid scopes, and we will match whether the scopes which we are getting in the auth requests are present in the available scopes or not. So let's do that. First of all, I will create a variable called available scopes. So let's create that here. I will say private static final available scopes equal to, and let's say its type is set string, and I can say set dot of, and the first is email, and then we have profile. So these are the two available scopes. Now let's validate the scope. So I will just say validate scopes auth request, and let's create a method here. First of all, we will check if the scope is present in auth request or not. So if auth request dot scope is null or it is empty, so auth request dot scope is empty. In that case, we will throw the error. So throw new illegal this exception. Now here we need the redirect URI. So auth request dot redirect URI. Now the error code, I can say invalid request, and the description will be scopes are required. So instead of illegal access exception, it should be invalid auth request exception. Now we'll say if available scope does not contain auth request dot scope, but scope will be multiple strings, so we cannot do this. What we need to do is, let's say string string scopes will be auth request dot scope dot split by space, and for scope in scopes, if the scope is not available in the available scopes, in that case let's throw this error again. So I will copy it and I will paste it here. So auth request redirect URI, it will be invalid scope, and this we can say scope is not a valid scope, and otherwise the request is valid. So what we did is, first we validated the realm, then we validated client, then we validated redirect URI, then response type, and then we validated scopes. Now we are throwing some exceptions, so we need to catch those exceptions and we need to handle them appropriately. So in the UI, let's create a new Java class and I will call it authorization controller advice, and I will make it controller advice. Now this will handle one exception of type invalid auth request exception. So let's create a method public, and it will get return a model and view, and the method name can be anything. I am giving a name handle invalid auth request exception, and but here we need the model as well, so I will say model. Now I will check here if e dot get redirect URI is null. That means we just need to show the error. We don't need to redirect the user to somewhere else. So in that case, let's do this model dot add attribute. Error will be e dot get message and return new model and view. So what we will do is we will return a model and view, and here the view name will be error. So we will create one view with the name error.html, and the model will be this one, but we need to send it as a map. Otherwise, so if it is not null, that means we need to redirect the user to redirect URI with error code and error description. So let's do that. So what I will do is model dot add attribute. Instead of error, it will be error code, and e dot get error code. Model dot add attribute error description. It will be e dot get error description. So this is instead of error underscore code, this should be error only because that is the standard. And now we need to redirect. So we will just return new model and view, but instead of returning the error view, we will redirect the user. So I will say redirect e dot get redirect URI and model dot as map. So now this model, these attributes will be passed as query parameters to the redirect URI. So now since that is done, now let's create this error. So inside resources, we need to first create a directory. I will call it templates. Inside templates, let's create a new HTML file. I will call it error. And let's just say error here. And here, let's say xmlns th equal to http www.timelib.org. And here let's just say div th text will be error. If we don't get any error in validate auth request method, so in this case we need to return login screen to the user. Now since we know that the auth request is a valid auth request, now we can see the login page to the user. So I will return user login page. Now there is no template called user login.html, so I will create a new HTML file and I will call it user login. The title can be, let's say, login. Now we need to create a form here. First of all, we need to tell the user like which realms they are trying to log in. So for example, I will just say login to, then span, and I can say th text equal to, let's just say realm name. So we will just say login to, and then the name of the realm will be here. Now we need to pass the realm name here from the authorization controller here. So what I would like to do is inside validate auth request, I will just return this realm. So let's do that. Realm equal to this one. Now if I go here, and this should return realm, and it will return this one. So validate realm method is should return one realm, and that realms should be passed to this authorization controller. So let's say the return type is realm here. Now if I go to authorization controller, I can say realm equal to this dot authorization service dot validate auth request. Now we have the realm, so let's pass that realm. So I will just say model dot add attribute realm. Now if I go to user login, here is I can say realm dot get name. So this is the name of the realm. Now after that we need to create a form. So let's do that. Form action. Now this is where we need to define where the request will be sent whenever user submits this form. So I will say th action. Let's import this th here. So lns th equal to timelib.org. So we have th action will be. Now where do we want to send the request? So we will come to this point later. for now, let's just say method post. Now inside form, let's create one p tag. I can say username, input text, name will be username. We don't need ID here. Now we need password. So p password name will be password, and we don't need ID. And after that we need a submit button. So p button type will be submit, and I can say sign in. So now we have a form here. Now what I want to do is I want to specify what will be this action. So what we will do is the authorization controller. So we have this auth request. Now whenever user clicks on login button, we need to know what was the original auth request for which we displayed the login form. So in order to accomplish that, we need to store this auth request somewhere. Now we should store this somewhere like in, let's say, Redis database or MySQL database. So since Redis database is faster, we should ideally store it there. But for now, I will just store it in memory. So for that, I will just do this dot authorization service dot save auth request, and I will pass this auth request here. Now let's go here. I will create this method. Now I want to save it. So in order to save it, I will create a new repository here. So inside authorization, let's create a new Java class. I will call it auth request repository, and I will mark it as repository. Let's go to authorization service, and here inject the auth request repository, private final auth request repository, and let's do constructor injection here. Now after that, I will just say this dot auth request repository dot save, and I will just say auth request. Now let's create this method. Now what I want to do is whenever we save it, we should generate one random string that will be ID. So for that I will just create one map here. So map of string auth request equal to new hash map. Now we need to save this auth request, but before that we need to generate one unique key. So I will just say string id equal to strings dot generate random string. Let's say I will generate a string of length 50. Now to be on safe side, we will just check if this id is already present in auth requests. In that case, we will generate it again. Now after that, I will put this auth request with this id in the auth request map, and after that I will just return this id. So the return type should be string here. Now if I go to authorization service, so I will just return this, and its return type also should be string. Now we know the id, so let's go here and say string or request id will be this one. Instead of passing the auth request id to the model, what I want to do is I want to create that action URL. So I will just say string auth action URI equal to realms plus realm id plus auth and plus this auth request id. So slash realms, then realm id, then we have this auth, so that this controller will handle this part, and after that we will create another mapping in this class, and so that will handle this action. Now instead of auth request id, I will just say auth action URI, and it will be auth action URI. Now let's go to user login here, and in here I will just say auth action URI. So that is it. Let's go to authorization server. What is the error? Okay, we need to return realm here, so let's return realm. Now let's run the application. Okay, we are getting some error because MySQL database is not running. I'll just docker compose up d, but before that I need to start the Docker engine. So when the Docker engine is running, I can run docker compose update command, and it will spin up the MySQL server. So in the previous videos, we have seen this docker compose.yml file. So this will run a MySQL database. So it is created. So it is running, I guess. Now if I rerun the application, so it looks like the application is running. Now if I go to application or properties, the port is okay. So the application is running on port 8000, but I want to run it on port 9000. So I will just say server dot port will be 9000, and I will rerun it. Now the application is running on port 9000. I have created a list of the URL where we can test. So I have this URL for invalid realm. This is the URL for invalid client ID. So where client ID is missing. Now in this request the client ID is wrong, and in the next request the redirect URI is not present. In the next one it is incorrect. In the next request the response type is not present, then response type is incorrect. So I have compiled a list of all these URLs which we can test against. So I will create a client. So I will create a confidential client, and this is the Sunny Redirect URI and everything. Let's uh, let's send this request. So one client has been created, and this is the client ID. So I will just copy it, and the notes I will paste this client ID. First of all, let's copy this URL and paste it in the browser. So now this URL here, the realm ID is incorrect. So we can see invalid realm here. For the second one, the realm ID is correct, but we are not passing any parameter. So it should say the client not present because the client ID is not present. So LM client ID not present or empty. Now the third one is this, where client ID is present but it is invalid. So invalid client. Now the client ID is correct, but we don't have any redirect URI. So in your redirect URI is empty. Now we have redirect URI, but this is incorrect. So you can see the K is missing from this callback. So if I send this, redirect URI is invalid. Now the redirect URI is correct, but the response type is not present. So let's Now here it says redirect URI is invalid. So let's see why is that. Okay, let's go to clients here, and here redirect URI is localhost 8081 auth 2 callback. Localhost 8081 auth 2. Yes. So this would be auth 2 here. Now you can see we are redirecting the user to this redirect URI with error is invalid request and error description is response type is required. Okay. Now let's go ahead and instead of auth it should be auth 2. So I will make auth 2 everywhere. Now let's put some response type, but the response type is invalid. It is COD. Now we are redirecting the user to redirect URI, but here error is invalid request and error description is invalid response type. So response type is present, but it is invalid. Now again we have invalid response token. So the token is in the list of valid response types, but since the client is confidential client, so this should always be code. So if we do this, the error is unauthorized client and error description is invalid response type. Now after that we have invalid scope. So scope is not present. So here scopes are required. Now again we have invalid scope because the scope is not. So here the scopes we are requesting for our email and storage, but there is no scope called storage, so it should give error. So you can see storage is not a valid scope. Now at the end we have a valid auth URL. So let's test that. Copy it and paste it here. Now we can see the login form. Now if I inspect it, elements, body, form. Yeah, here you can see the action is realms, first realm, auth, and this is the auth request ID which we have created, and the method is post. So we are able to validate the auth request and we are able to show the login form to the user with the name of the realm. So that is it for this video. In the next video, we will submit this login form. We will save the user session and we will show them the authorization interface where user can either deny the application or they can allow the application. Thank you everyone for watching the video. I will meet you in the next one. Until then, keep learning. Bye.